1956, 4:30 a.m. The weather, clear and mild. A colorful eastern sky gives promise of a beautiful, bright springtime day in the Colorado Rockies. The first rays of the sun have not yet penetrated into the canyon of the Colorado River at Bond, 129 miles west of Denver, where 5 railroad men are just reporting for work, called for the SPD through eastbound connection with Southern Pacific. They've been off duty for 12 hours, so they're fully rested and alert as they await the arrival of their train, now only a few miles away, rolling along with 46 loads, 30 empties and a caboose, 3,218 actual tons. Its loads include lumber and plywood from the forests and mills of the Northwest, going eastward for new homes and factories, lettuce and oranges from California en route to the markets of the Midwest, other fruits and vegetables, canned goods, cattle, ore and oil, a typical cargo with a total value in excess of $160,000. And when you add in the value of the equipment, the 77 cars and the diesel-electric locomotive, this train is worth more than $1 million. $1 million on the move. And it rolls along freely on the easy uphill grade of the Colorado River route, pulled by the 6,000 horses packed into the 4 diesel units. Powerful, well-trained horses, instantly responsive to the engineer's touch on throttle and brake. Since leaving Grand Junction at midnight, the air brakes have been applied 8 times, including 1 emergency stop, and each time they were fully effective. Back at Bond, the new crew is ready to go. The conductor has gotten his orders and gives 1 set to the engineer. They check their watches. 4:40 a.m. now. Our $1 million train should be showing up any minute. In fact, it's just now entering the yard at the west end. The engineer makes a service application of the air brakes, which respond in normal fashion to slow down the train. And here she comes. These 3 men, fireman, head brakeman, engineer, will ride the head end for the final 129 miles into Denver. The conductor and rear trainman will ride the caboose. All are skillful, careful, experienced railroaders. Between them, they have a total of 114 years of railroad service. The $1 million SPD will be in good hands. Another air brake application brings the heavy train to a stop, exactly where intended. In accordance with air brake rules, the incoming engineer leaves the brakes applied. 2/3 of a mile away, a car inspector makes a visual inspection to be sure the brake application is effective all the way to the rear of the train. The engine crew climbs into the cab to prepare for departure. First, though, the engineer goes through an established routine as required by the air brake rules. After making an additional application, he checks the gauge for leakage. Nothing is left to chance. Everything is checked. The fireman, meanwhile, is making a patrol of the engine rooms of the 4 diesel units, also according to rule. After the 1-minute leakage test, the engineer releases the air, the gauge indicating that all brakes are releasing properly as the brake pipe pressure reaches the standard of 90 pounds. As a further check, the car inspector makes sure that the brakes actually release at the rear end of the train. The SPD doesn't linger long at Bond. The engine is not detached, no cars are added or cut off. It takes only about 5 minutes to change crews, make the brake test, and leave town. 4:50 a.m. What are they thinking about as the train pulls out of Bond? The engineer and the head trainman. Well, we don't know for sure, but chances are they're doing a little mental arithmetic, estimating the time they'll arrive at North Yard in Denver. But whatever answer they may come up with, they're wrong. The train isn't going to arrive in Denver. Its trip will end very suddenly, 31 miles and 65 minutes from here. The fireman leaves the cab at this point to make another routine patrol of the engine rooms, which usually takes about 15 minutes. He doesn't know it, but there is not that much time left. 2 men are in the cab now. The brakeman has been railroading for 29 years. The engineer for 36. He's run engines over this territory for more than 20 years. The safety of this million-dollar train and their own safety and that of their fellow crew members is in capable and experienced hands. 5:45 a.m. now. 10 more minutes, 8 more miles. 4 minutes later, 2.5 miles closer to trouble, the SPD breezes past Kremling. The signal is green. Proceed. They've all been green since leaving Bond. Speed is now up at the authorized maximum. Another green aspect at the intermediate signal. Both engineer and brakeman see it and call it. Then the brakeman makes another visual inspection of his train, doing his job according to rule. These 2 men are a good railroading team. They've known each other and worked together for many years. So naturally, they have a good many things to talk about. Then, too, as the engineer later testified, frequent conversations help keep them awake, which is mighty important to say the least. While they're talking, let's look ahead a couple of miles. Approaching from the east is the MX, Moffat Extra, pulled by a 3-unit diesel. At the siding, named Troublesome, the remotely controlled power switch is lined for them to enter the siding. The red over yellow signal indication means proceed at medium speed through turnout. The MX is a local freight train en route to Phippsburg on the Craig branch with 24 loads and 20 empties. The dispatcher at his control board at Sulphur has set up what should be an excellent meet, with neither train being appreciably delayed. But let's get back to the SPD, still breezing along in fine style. The positive block signal at the west end of Troublesome displays a high yellow. Proceed at medium speed, prepared to stop at next signal. Only nobody is looking. The one they didn't see is the only restrictive signal they've had since leaving Bond. What are they talking about that's so important that they missed the one that matters? Get this, they're discussing how lucky they are to get such a good train. Yes, that's what the brakeman testified. And while they're congratulating themselves, their luck is about to run out. Suddenly, the engineer realizes what's happening. He slams the air brakes into emergency, but it's too late. Almost at once, the dispatcher knows something is wrong. Lights on the track diagram showing the location of trains stop progressing as they should, and the CTC machine begins a continuous cycling. He immediately puts in a call for the maintainer to check the machine. The scene at Troublesome is one of incredible destruction. The once powerful diesel locomotive of the SPD is battered and still, half buried in the soft ground alongside the roadbed. It will cost nearly $250,000 to restore it to service. Rugged steel freight cars are shattered and smashed, some jammed together in tightly wedged pileups, others scattered at random over a wide area. Both tracks are torn up, signal and communication wires knocked out, complete devastation. By some miracle, the 10 crew members of the 2 trains all live through the terrible impact. Only 3 of them will require hospitalization, but all know they looked sudden death right in the eye at that smashing instant. It's 15 minutes after the crash before one of the trainmen on the MX reaches a phone at the next siding to the east. His call puts in motion the railroad's emergency machinery. Within minutes, teletypes are clicking out the available details. Principal officers are immediately notified by phone. A gigantic cleanup operation is speedily organized to clear the track and restore the line to service. Work trains with giant cranes are quickly assembled at Denver and Grand Junction and started on their way to Troublesome. As further details come in, transportation officers make arrangements to detour important trains via the Royal Gorge route and cancel others. Track materials and men are pulled off other jobs, all available work equipment rounded up. Signal and communications troubleshooters head for the scene. The immediate objective, get the line open at the earliest possible moment. The back-breaking, heart-breaking task was soon underway as men and machines attacked the twisted maze of steel and wood. The giant locomotive crane from Denver went to work on the pile-up at the east switch where the collision occurred to clear a pathway through the tangled wreckage so that the torn-up track could be restored to serviceable condition and the railroad reopened for traffic. Time enough later to think about salvaging damaged equipment and lading. The badly damaged locomotive, already well off to the side, was ignored for the time being. In all, 60 cars from the two trains were smashed, many of them hopelessly beyond repair. Damage to equipment, not including the locomotive, totaled nearly $60,000. In addition to the main pileup at the east switch, a secondary impact occurred a quarter of a mile west where several cars of the SPD jackknifed into the MX on the adjoining track. The big hook from Grand Junction was put to work clearing wreckage at this point. The first wrecking equipment arrived on the scene about 10 a.m., and from then until 5:15 the next morning, nearly 24 hours after the accident, men and machines never stopped working. Total cost to the railroad for wrecking expense reached $25,000, and that's out-of-pocket expense only. It doesn't include, for example, the time of division and general officers who directed the operation, which normally would have been spent in productive activities. While the powerful crane was pulling and tugging at the wreckage, truckloads of ties and other track materials were arriving and being unloaded for the necessary track rebuilding. Working off the track, heavy bulldozers equipped with powerful winches were aiding in the task of clearing the line. Their use expedited the wrecking operation considerably. So tightly wedged together were some of the wrecked cars, it was often very helpful to be able to pull in two directions at once with crane and bulldozer. With many of the cars lying roughly parallel to the track, it was possible to hook the winch cable over them and simply roll them out of the way. Car by car, the wreckage was disentangled and moved aside, an agonizingly slow process, but progress was being made. Crane and bulldozers kept at it without pause. Meanwhile, freight claim agents were surveying the situation and making plans to salvage as much as possible of the damaged lading and get it on its way to consignees. Their efforts held down the losses, but still, the railroad paid claims totaling more than $40,000. At the secondary pileup, the big hook from Grand Junction was making good progress. Here, the damage was, for the most part, a little less severe. This stock car, for example, still had its trucks under it, and it was lifted back onto the rails. The laborious task went on and on. Not until the first train was by at 5:29 the next morning did the work crews at last take a much-needed rest. More than 2 weeks were required to complete the job of salvaging equipment and cargo and rebuilding track. Restoring the railroad to its former condition at this point cost more than $17,000. Of course, the true cost of this accident cannot be measured only in dollars, but the dollar cost alone reached the staggering sum of $375,000. And this does not include such items as the cost of detouring trains, the loss of wages and revenues from trains which were annulled, and so on. But of even greater importance are the long-term effects on the railroad and its employees, most particularly the 10 men directly involved, the 10 men who faced sudden death because of the momentary carelessness of 2 of their number. Who can put a price tag on that? Well, that's the story of the trouble at Troublesome. That's the story as told by the men involved. It's over and done with now, but it won't soon be forgotten. The wreckage has been removed and the railroad repaired, and to transcontinental passengers breezing by, this siding appears no different from any other. But a great many railroaders will remember it for a long, long time.